Dylan, a new member joining Rudy Giuliani's campaign for the White House. The former New York City mayor rang the opening bell at the NASDAQ market site this morning. He announced Steve Forbes' endorsement. Mr. Forbes is the president and CEO and editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine. Forbes will serve as a national campaign co-chair and senior policy advisor. And joining me now with the first on CNBC interview is Steve Forbes, president and CEO of Forbes. Steve, nice to have you with us. Welcome to the closing bell.
Good to be with you, Maria.
Let me ask you to tell us a little about your role on Team Giuliani in his run for the White House.
Well, I officially joined today. I'll be helping out on economic policy formation, other issues, as well as getting some resources to get his message out there.
Let me ask you about economic issues, and in particular, tax structure, something that certainly what you've been talking about and really made famous, that flat tax. Mr. Giuliani was on with my colleague, Larry Kudlow, just last week. Listen to what he had to say about supply-side economics.
I was on the supply side for sure. I mean, I watched Ronald Reagan do it, learned it, saw it work, saw taxes get reduced, more revenue come in. Practiced it as the mayor of New York, as the first mayor ever to do that. It was almost harder to do it in New York than it is in Washington. There was less of acceptance for it and more resistance to it. But I lowered taxes 22, 23 times.
Steve, does he support the flat tax and extending the tax cuts on dividends and capital gains?
He certainly supports the extension of the tax cuts that, as you know, expire in 2010. He realizes that those things are not made permanent. We're going to go into a recession in 2011. He knows the tax code today is a monstrosity. He told Larry that, so he wants to do some simplification there. And what I like about Rudy Giuliani is he's not afraid to tackle big things. He did it in New York City, and if he goes against the tax code, I think he's going to win, and the tax code is going to lose, and we'll get some simplicity finally.
Now, it was Grover Norquist's group, Americans for Tax Reform, who asked political candidates to sign a no new tax pledge. As of a couple of weeks ago, Rudy hadn't signed it. Do you know if he's going to sign that?
I don't know if he's going to sign the thing, but I do know that he wants to cut taxes, and it's not just rhetoric. He proved it here in New York City. As he said on Larry's show, he cut taxes 23 times, over $9 billion, reduced the tax burden on the typical New Yorker. That had never happened before, and you remember when he took office, he faced a large budget deficit. Everyone was telling him he had to raise taxes. He said that is garbage, threw the recommendations away, and instituted a series of tax cuts, which was revolutionary for New York, including cutting the top income tax rate by 21%.
Yeah, it's really true. Here's another clip from that interview on something he had to say about taxes. Listen to this, Steve.
I don't like taxes. I don't know how to make that any clearer. I don't like taxes. I generally think taxes are, given the level of taxation that we have in a lot of our states and in the country, kind of inventing new ones is a very big mistake.
All right, we put that aside for a moment. Tell me what other items are on top of the agenda in terms of economic reform, Steve, on Rudy's agenda.
Well, I think he's also going to tackle the spending side. One thing he did in New York was make sure that the spending increases were less than the rate of inflation, which is something that had never happened before. If you look at the spending in terms of his 8 years in office and compare what happened on the state level in New York and the federal level, his increases were far less than what you had on the state and federal level and was less than the rate of inflation. And if you can do that in New York City, with a city council, as you know, that is 90% Democrat, it's probably the most liberal body in the country or the world except for San Francisco, that is one heck of an achievement.
So give me your sense of the economy today, Steve, and then I want to ask you what you've heard from Rudy in that regard. We have worries over the subprime issue extending into the rest of the housing market, and of course, Greenspan out there talking about recession. Where are you on where we are right now in terms of the economy?
Well, my own feeling is even though the economy is slow, the fundamentals are still there for an advance. And in terms of the subprime market, Rudy Giuliani himself said the thing to do is for Congress not to regulate, not to get involved, leave the thing alone. It'll work itself out. It's overreaction that creates the problems, not a market correction.
What about this idea of business having been lost to